Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily. Today is Friday, June 14th, 2024. On today's episode of the show, we're going to be talking about the newest Pixar film, Inside Out 2. My name is Ben Pearson. I'm an editor at slashfilm.com, and I'm joined on today's episode by Slash Film editors Brad Oman
Hey, that's me.
and BJ Colangelo.
I can't stop crying.
Oh no.
Yes, lots of emotions will be discussed in today's episode. All right, guys, let's kick things off here with some general, sort of spoiler-free thoughts about the film. BJ, since you started off so hot for us, what did you make of Inside Out 2?
I I really liked this movie. Obviously, the comparisons to the first movie are going to be inevitable. I'm waffling between how much I prefer the first one to this one because it's very hard to distance myself from just being blown away by the first one. But I like, this is the movie that I wanted this to be. If I was going to get an Inside Out sequel, which I didn't need, I'm glad that this is the one I got. I feel very similarly to how I feel about like Toy Story 2 with this movie, that like I didn't need this, but I'm glad that it's here and I really like it. And I cried like a big baby. So, mission accomplished.
Brad, what about you?
Yeah, I really like this one a lot too. It treads some familiar territory of the first one, and like BJ said, the comparisons are inevitable, and it doesn't quite measure up because Inside Out did something that no other movie like this had really done before, and it really pulled it at the heartstrings in a beautiful way. And this one does the same thing with some variations and with some new characters. But I really liked what it did, and I think that as a sequel, it works and turns this really into a great franchise for kids to grow up with. There's some kids who probably grew up watching the original Inside Out who are feeling some of these complicated feelings as they grow up, and there'll be new generations of kids that get to experience this too. And the way that it breaks down such complex things and really digs into stuff that can be hard to explain to kids is so lovely. And it's funny, it's charming. The animation is incredible. You can really see some of the cool improvements they made from the first one. And so yeah, I really liked it a lot. In fact, one thing I want to say, because like this really bugged me, and I don't mean to call out this specific critic, and I won't even mention them by name, but the headline said something like "all brains and no heart," and all I could think of was the line from Jerry Maguire was "No heart, no heart. I'm all heart, motherfucker."
Oh, that's funny. I'll steal a line from Chris Evangelista, who spoke a little bit about the sequel on an episode of the podcast earlier this week. He said that the novelty had kind of worn off. And I absolutely agree with that idea. Like, part of the magic of the first movie was being taken into Riley's head for the first time and learning the structure of how the mind works, right? And like being introduced to all these emotions and seeing the clever puns and all this stuff. And this movie tries to recreate some of that by like introducing new emotions, which you've seen all over the trailers and stuff. And it takes us into new parts of Riley's mind. But the very nature of returning to this setting means that some of the shine has kind of worn off. So I thought the movie was mostly effective and overall I enjoyed watching it. But yeah, to me, it just kind of feels like, yeah, a lesser than experience than watching the first movie. But like ultimately, I kind of think that at the end of the day, I'm where BJ is, where like I'm glad that it exists because it's almost like I wish that it could have been released as like one gigantic movie or something like that, like or re-edited into like a weird one of those weird Godfather edits or something where it's like 4 hours long or whatever, and it's just like one long story. Because I don't know, maybe something about like the almost 10-year wait between movies kind of, and the fact that the first film was so good like built up my expectations that I was like expecting something equally amazing, and like it's just real tough to live up to that first movie. So, all right, let's get into spoilers. Brad, was there anything that jumped out at you, I guess, that you couldn't say in your earlier section? Any particular plot point that you wanted to dig into or anything like that?
No, but I mean, and BJ, I think will have a lot more to speak to about this because she wrote a great personal essay that you can find on Slash Film. If not now, then shortly, whenever you're listening to this. But I really liked how they approached anxiety as an emotion and made it so that while anxiety can easily be seen as the antagonist in the movie, the character isn't like a straight up villain. Yeah, and this is one thing that I read more about in the art of Inside Out 2, where they really had to hone in on like the confrontation, the conflict that arose from having these new emotions arrive and what it meant for Joy and for Riley. And having anxiety be the driving force of this big change in Riley's life, and also upheaving everything that like Joy has come to like find in the balance between her and the other emotions, rather than trying to control every single aspect. It brings up that dynamic again, but in a totally different way, and with the added level of like digging into what like anxiety does to us, especially when you're a kid and you don't fully understand and you're trying to figure out your identity. And like you can see like how they were able to like really hone in on that. And like Pixar, I love their development process, because like I said in the art book, they talk about some of the emotions that didn't make it, and one of the ones that was seemingly would have been the antagonist if it wasn't anxiety was shame. But they couldn't really figure out how to make shame a fully 3D character that didn't feel like it was just an arch cartoon villain that like only wanted there to be something like bad happening, and like really just like made problems for Riley without doing it from a place of care for Riley. But
Mhm.
anxiety, like they really hone in on the fact that like everything she's doing because she's trying to protect Riley. She's trying to make sure that Riley has like the most promising future and gets what she wants. And so like she's trying to bring joy to Riley's life in a completely different way than Joy is. And I really liked that dynamic, and how like it made Joy feel helpless, but then it also allowed for that evolution that we see at the end of the movie. And while it's similar to like Joy again figuring out, oh, like there's room for all of us, it was something that like anxiety had to learn as well as a character. So yeah, I really like that a lot about the story.
Yeah, I loved the anxiety character, and Maya Hawke just really killed it in
Oh
the
gosh,
voice
she's
role
so
there.
good.
What do you think about that whole thing, PJ?
So yeah, the addition of anxiety, like really they did such a good job with this. I mean, I've talked before on the show about how I used to be a teacher, but I don't usually talk about how I was a social emotional teacher. I literally taught children emotional competency and regulation. And so Inside Out was a huge, tool that I used to use, and I'm all I could think about is like how much better it like our classes could have been if this movie existed at the same time. But the thing that I like the most about this movie, which is in ways that I think it's actually some parts of this movie I do think are better than the original. And I think it's when they are unafraid to say harsh realities out loud that we tend to shield children from. Like one of the big ones in the first Inside Out is when Sadness is talking about the importance of crying, and one of the things that she says is crying helps me slow down and obsess over the weight of life's problems, which is like a very heavy thing to like put in a movie that children are going to be watching. But the two big ones for me in this is at one point Joy says, I don't know how to stop anxiety, maybe I can't, or I can't, maybe that's just what happens when you get older, you have less joy.
Hmm.
And like that sounds horrible, but it's so true. It's not to say that joy doesn't exist in your lives, but the older you get, the more like aware you become of how fucked up everything is, and you have so many more responsibilities, and you can't just like be a kid and hang out and everything's cool and have a good time. Like there's so much bad stuff, so there is less joy in your life, there are more emotions taking control of your console. So I was like, that is a huge swing to put in this kids movie, that's great.
Hmm.
But the big one was from anxiety, which is when she makes the confession of like, I'm sorry, I was just trying to protect her. And like, oh my god, like saying that out loud just made me almost start crying again. Because I think we all have such a misunderstanding of the functionality of anxiety in our lives. And that's what it is. It's an overreactive like response to, traumatic stimuli. That's what anxiety is. And giving giving audiences, young and old, the ability to understand their own mind a little better, just fantastic, like unreal fantastic. And I don't know, I think that this movie's held back a little bit by the expectations of the original, because the second like the second act of this movie I think is kind of a slog. I think the opening and the ending are like so good, but that middle section is just like meh and doesn't do it quite as well as the
Yeah.
first. But I think the ending is just as good as the original film, and I actually think the opening is better than the original film.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I agree
Yeah.
with your take on that second act, because the as soon as they leave the vault and they start wandering, there's not as much interesting like discovery of seeing things in the mind for the first time. Like it takes a little too long for them to like figure out what anxiety is doing with Riley's imagination and stuff like that. But then yeah, once the third act starts kicking in, like you get some more of that creativity, and it feels kind of like the original again. But yeah, that second act,
Yeah.
it's missing something.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think like it's because there's like the scene with the brainstorm, which I feel like the entire part of that is them building towards that one pun that isn't very good.
Hmm.
But the imagination land being turned into essentially like existential worst case scenario land, that I thought was great because that is absolutely what happens to your imagination. Like you stop being a kid of like, what if I had, a French fry garden and Cloudland? Now I'm just going to think about how I'm going to die alone.
Yeah, I loved that. I think they break into like a pillow fort area where all of that is happening, and like the playing cards are used as cubicles and all of that.
Yeah.
Like I love the design of that whole little area, and like yeah, everything about that scene was really great. There's like some really funny little subtle jokes and stuff throughout up on the screens and stuff. If you're watching really closely, you can see a bunch of things that they don't really talk about in dialogue or whatever. But I thought it was great. Yeah, I totally agree with you guys. Like especially that second act part, like I just was disappointed in the pun heavy stuff this time around. That was so good in the first movie, and this time it just kind of feels like there are a lot of reject concepts that weren't quite good enough to make it into the first film, but they were just like, we'll use them here. Like the sarcasm bit was like okay, but like and the brainstorm thing, like you said, yeah, like it just kind of felt a little uninspired compared to
Well,
what we've
the
seen before.
first one for me too, like the puns or the little, because I rewatched Inside Out 1 beforehand, and like there are so many little ones that I had forgotten about because they feel so like lived in. Like when they run into the cloud person, and he's like, "Not now, Jake, it's Cloud Town." Like that, like got me, and I was like, "How did I forget that joke was there? That's great." But there's all these little bits like that, whereas in this movie, it very much feels like, "Huh? Did you hear the pun we made?" And that
Hmm.
makes it like less funny to me.
Yeah, I did love the part where they go to the vault though, and specifically the video game character that Riley had a crush on, and that Disgust seems to be enamored by.
I'm
Um,
so obsessed with that arc. I'm gonna tame what I said in our private work chat, but the fact that Disgust is the only person who is into the Lance Lashblade like video game character, that is proof positive that we are seeing the seeds of when you have that crush that you shouldn't have, like the embodiment of hear me out. And it's like, why is it the ghoul from Fallout? Like, why is that what you're into? But Disgust is really into it. So it's something that you should think is gross, but you don't. And I love that. And I think that's going to fly over the heads of a lot of people.
what did you make of that whole vault sequence, Brad?
I love the vault sequence. I that's something that I had been excited for people to see ever since they showed the first act to me at Pixar back at the end of March, because Bluefy and Lance Lashblade are two great characters, and I kind of wish that they got to go like with the core emotions throughout the rest of the adventure, because I feel like it might have added a more fun dynamic to what was happening. Um, but yeah, those are absolutely great characters. And I love the callback to Pouchy coming back at the end, and like just
Mhm.
how aggressive anger reaches into his mouth to grab the dynamite.
Yeah, like deeply disturbing imagery right there.
The Bluefy and Pouchy character too, like really made me happy because people have been pointing out, okay, so it's like a blue dog that's obviously Blue's Clues, but it's also talking to the audience, so it's very Dora the Explorer. But what it also is Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, which is another like thing with like that's why you get the options of what's in the pouch. That's a Mickey Mouse Clubhouse thing. So I also think it's very cute because Pixar's doing kind of a nod to their parent company and kind of mocking them at the same time, which is great, but people are so distracted by the obvious ones that they're missing the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse read, which I love.
I wanted to take a minute and give us some space to just mention like any little jokes or little moments or anything like that that we really appreciated. Like I was kind of alluding to this earlier, but there's that moment where, or that whole scene where anxiety is encouraging the different parts of Riley's imagination to imagine these kind of like worst case scenario situations. And there's one of the little bits up on the screen as like number 87 or something is uh, she's on the ice and she has fallen and her tongue has gotten stuck to the ice somehow. And then she's just like this terrified look on her face. Brad, I think there was one that you wrote about on the site about that was just like an Easter egg about a reference to a Sesame Street character.
Yeah, this is just a little thing. So one of the things that director Kelsey Mann talked about during the press conference at Pixar Animation Studios was that he's been a longtime fan of Sesame Street and the Muppets. And for those that you don't remember, both Frank Oz and Dave Goelz have bit parts in the first Inside Out. They play two of the subconscious guards who like they get into like a little argument about whose hat is whose. And Frank Oz is famously, obviously, the voice of Yoda in the Star Wars saga, but he's also the voice of Muppets like Ms. Piggy and Fozzie. And Dave Goelz is the voice of Gonzo and Dr. Benson Honeydew and other Muppet characters. And Kelsey Mann's a big fan of Muppets and Sesame Street. And one of them is also Carol Spinney, who is famously the person who was behind Big Bird and Oscar the Grouch. And he met Carol Spinney one time at a shopping mall. He randomly recognized him, and like who out there's going to recognize Carol Spinney because you don't ever see Carol Spinney.
I would have,
yeah. So. And so he like went and talked to him and met him, and he said he was just a really kind man and everything. Unfortunately, Carol Spinney passed away, and so even though they were able to bring back Frank Oz and Dave Goelz as mind cops in Inside Out 2 again, Kelsey Mann would have loved to have given Carol Spinney a cameo, but what they did instead is they made a little tribute to him in the form of a place called Spinney's Pizza. And the logo of the pizza place does have like the likeness of Carol Spinney and like his goatee and whatnot on a pizza slice. But unfortunately, the initial tribute they had was in a scene that got cut from the movie. After the championship game in the beginning, the girls were supposed to go to a pizza place, and that was going to be Spinney's Pizza. You would have actually seen the restaurant and everything. So what they did is they repurposed the pizza place so that you still see remnants of it when Riley is hanging out with the Firehawks in like a common area at hockey camp. And if you look at the pizza that's like on the tables, the boxes are from Spinney's Pizza. So that's the tribute they got in there to Carol Spinney.
That's cool. Were there any other like really subtle jokes or Easter eggs or anything like that that you noticed and wanted to call out?
Everything that Ennui does and says made me laugh out loud every single time. Which like because that's also such like a hyper specific teen girl emotion. Like everybody has ennui, but when you are 13, especially like the summer between 8th grade and freshman year, this is also why Bo Burnham's 8th Grade is a movie I love so much, because it captures that perfectly. But the every time Riley was doing something that like was totally against who she is, or it's like, I don't actually like that band. Yeah, it was the best time of my life. We had so much fun. I just wanted to like jump through the screen, and I was like, God, no, you're gonna regret this. Don't do this. Because we all do it. We all do it. I famously have talked about how the first review I ever did of Jennifer's Body back in 2009, which was a horrible time to be a woman working in horror, was like, believe it or not, but I really liked this movie. And like that's all I could think about this entire time was like, Riley, no, don't embrace what you like. It's okay. So yeah, I love that. Not really a joke. They nailed that experience and that feeling so hard.
Yeah.
There were two specific Easter eggs that I noticed. One of them I did spot the traditional A113 Easter egg, which is something that is in every single Pixar movie. If you don't know what that is, just to make it short, it's basically that's the like the classroom number that when they were at when the Pixar originators were at Cal Arts, like that was the room that they were in a lot, and so that number letter number combination makes it into all Pixar movies in some form. And here you can see it in Roman numerals. It's the vault that the emotions get locked into. You can see it above the vault door. Nice. And then a fun one for people who love Bing Bong if you look in the scene when we go into the emotions bedrooms just before the puberty alarm goes off, when you look at Joy's little sleeping area, if you look on her bookshelf, there's a little makeshift statue of Bing Bong and his flying rocket wagon. So she obviously has like a little memento that makes her think of Bing Bong.
Just keeping him alive.
Speaking of the vault stuff, real quick, the deep dark shadow, or the biggest
deep dark
shadow,
secret.
or a deep dark secret, rather, yes, that Riley has. Did you guys stay through the credits to see what that was?
Yes.
I did.
Yeah, I was kind of disappointed by that. I thought that was like too much setup for that to be the payoff at the end.
You know, I initially thought so too, and I thought that it might come back in the end of the movie somehow and be significant to the story. But when you see what happens in the post credits, and if you didn't, the reveal is that Riley apparently burnt a hole in a rug at one point, and that's something that she's very scared of anybody knowing. But I actually liked it because it's like this little thing that, like, that's what a kid would worry about. Like, oh no, I don't want my parents to ever find out that I did this because I'll be in so much trouble.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess that's true.
Yeah, I think it's very cute for it to be that, especially because, towards the end we also see Riley coming to terms with everything about herself. Like, she breaks something at a store and like puts it back on the shelf and walks away from it, which again is like a very little kid thing to do.
Mhm.
But I will say I saw the movie with a bunch of press colleagues. Many of us were queer, and when it was like she's got this big, deep, dark secret, and watching how she reacts to the cool girls on the hockey team,
Yeah,
all of
Val
us
and
were
all that.
like,
Yeah.
I know what you are, and all of the boys you have crushes on are super femme. Okay, sure, yeah, okay, Riley. We'll see what they let you do when you turn 16.
Yeah, Inside Out 3. Yeah. Okay, let's take a break real quick, and then we'll come back and talk about the ending of the movie. So I wanted to talk to you guys about the anxiety attack. This is the part of the movie. Most of the time, I was laughing throughout, here and there. Maybe not quite as much as the first movie, but then I wasn't like super emotional. Like the Bing Bong moment in the first film, that comes whatever 2/3 of the way through or something. It just like completely wrecked me. And then this movie, I was kind of like I was open to it. I wanted to feel all of the emotions and really I don't know, cry my way through this movie. And I didn't really feel that until the very end. But I thought the anxiety attack was incredibly powerful. And especially the moment, like, sort of the transition out of that and into where Joy is being called back to the control panel, basically. And Riley has that warmth on her face and the music is swelling. And it was just all like super powerful. I was wondering if that hit you guys as hard as it hit me.
Oh, I almost barfed. I'll just like say that. So when Joy makes the comment about 2/3 of the way through that, like, maybe when you get older you have less joy, it made me cry. Like, it broke the floodgates opened, and I was just kind of like a constant trickle throughout the rest of the ending. When the anxiety attack happens, it was twofold. One, watching Riley have an anxiety attack almost gave me an anxiety attack because I know what that feels like, of being that young, being in like a competitive place where you have to like get your shit together and do the best you can do because this is going to affect your future, and your body is like nope, and like there's nothing you can do to stop it. So that like hit me really hard. But it's especially when they're trying to get through to anxiety and Joy finally breaks through this tornado of orange, and her hands are stuck on it and she cannot let go, because that is also such an anxiety thing of like, I can do all of like the grounding techniques and check in with my senses and do my breathing exercises. I can do everything I know I'm supposed to do, but if I'm in the middle of an anxiety attack, I'm in the middle of an anxiety attack, and it has to ride out. And to see that personified of like, you're not doing anything wrong by not being able to stop this. You kind of just have to let it happen. Like, I was destroyed, crying so hard. I was dry heaving. I was like fogging up my glasses, and I had my mask on. I'm choking in my mask. It was a problem. I was a disaster.
What about you, Brad?
Yeah, for me, that's I don't think that I got quite as choked up as I did in the first one. Something about that first one just hits a little bit different. But this one, the ending definitely did it for me. Just seeing all the emotions together and seeing anxiety, have that realization, and just the panic attack was done just like you said, so well. It feels realistic. It's one of the best depictions of that there's ever been, in a movie that's intended for kids. I think just before that, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish did that, and there was actually a whole like discourse online about how important and how well done that was. And so yeah, I really like that. And for a little while after I'd seen the first one again more recently, I was wondering like if it would ever get to a point when like the emotions wouldn't necessarily be the ones controlling Riley, because at some point you have to like think, well, the emotions shouldn't be the ones who are in control of Riley's mind. At some point Riley's mind has to be like, she has to be in control of herself. And doing that at the end of this movie by having the console calling to joy, like really like starts this stepping stone of Riley starting to be in control of her own emotions, and like knowing what she's feeling and when she wants to feel something, and really just like getting a grasp on who she is. And I really liked that development at the end of this one.
Yeah, that's well said. I
Yeah.
think it kind of, I appreciate and understand exactly what you're talking about there, Brad. But like ultimately, I kind of felt like this movie's message, which is all about how we are a collection of all of our experiences and emotions, and the way to establish your true self is to embrace every part of yourself. Like that to me just wasn't quite as powerful as the message of the first movie, which was specifically about how it's not only okay, but it's actually healthy to embrace sadness, which is an emotion that our culture encourages us to repress. I personally thought that this movie's message just wasn't quite as focused as the first movie, so it wasn't as powerful, it wasn't as moving to me, I guess emotionally, as the first movie's was. But because it almost feels like, yeah, we've kind of learned this lesson a little bit before. It's just like a broader version of a lesson that we learned the previous time.
Well, for
Um,
me too, like, I mean, well, one, puberty is messy, like extremely messy. And I love that they personify it by having them bring in the console, breaking things and then never coming back to fix it. Hilarious. But for me, it's not just like the anxiety attack in that big moment, but also when they are putting back together Riley's sense of self, the way that the core emotions are able to get back to headquarters is by writing a flood of bad memories, of bad experiences, of things that they have shot to the back of Riley's mind. And, we're not going to think about that. And it's forcing that all to come back, like the flood of everything that you've ever done wrong, and having to accept that that is also part of your core belief system. That is also part of who you are as a person, and like not running from that stuff. That to me was the infinitely more important message, is like letting those parts also be part of who you are, because stifling it and shoving it down and shoving it into the back of your mind is not healthy for anyone, because
yeah,
all the things that like Riley does quote unquote wrong in this movie when anxiety takes over are all lessons that she could have learned if she hadn't shoved them into the back of her mind. If they were part of her core being, anxiety wouldn't have had to go into overtime because she already would have learned these lessons.
yeah,
So like that, like it like rocked me, because I've been through a lot of shit in my life and a lot of trauma that I don't like to think about, but I have really spent the last like 6 years or so coming to peace with that, and I am so much more emotionally healthy coming to peace with like, yeah, this is a horrible bad thing that happened, but it is part of me and it is part of like how I got to where I am, and it's okay for that to be part of my story. That doesn't like make me a bad person. It's just part of me.
yeah.
So yeah, I was this whole movie, like that last third, I was like, I can't wait for therapy on Friday and talk about this. It's gonna be great.
All right. So I guess one of the last questions I have for you both: do you think this is like Pixar's big return? Is Pixar officially back now after, there's been so much conversation, and we've had a lot of these conversations on the podcast itself over the years, of like since the beginning of the pandemic, the way that Disney has treated Pixar and like trained audiences to stay at home and all of this. Like the movie seems to be doing pretty well. I've not looked at the most recent box office numbers as we record this on Friday, but it seems to be, yeah, performing pretty well. Like, do you think creatively, financially, culturally, Pixar is like officially back now? BJ, what do you think?
I it's difficult because part of me wants to say like, yeah, we're so back, But I think that this is a difficult movie to prove that with, because it is still existing IP. So is it that Pixar is back, or is it that Inside Out is back? Like, that becomes a difficult conversation. But at the same time, Elemental made a crap load of money. It just didn't make it in its opening weekend, and people like still keep forgetting that when
Yeah.
they say things like Inside Out's the most successful movie. It's like, Elemental was one of the top 10 highest grossing movies last year. It just had legs. So it's hard for me to tell. I do think that there will always be people who, I don't think that it's necessarily they've been trained to wait for streaming. I think there is part of that, but also like going to the movies when you have a family and when you have children is so expensive. It is prohibitively expensive in a lot of places. And so I think it's less like, oh, we've trained audiences to do that, and more like audiences are taking the most cost effective option. If you present people with a cost effective option, they're going to take it 9 times out of 10. So unless theaters can combat the cost effective option, that's what's going to prevail always. But these are beloved characters that a lot of kids really, really like, so they probably are going to come out for it because they really want to see these characters specifically.
Mhm. What do you think, Brad?
Yeah, I mean, like BJ said, Elemental was big, and a lot of people forget that just because the early, weekend box office numbers were not huge. And I think we're starting to see that some movies just need time for like some audiences to get around to seeing them. And if movies take a little longer to get to streaming, then I think that we, start seeing that people will go see them in theaters again because they don't want to wait much longer. And for me, I think that, like, if anything, this is a big return just because it feels like it's a little more in line from what you expect, and some of that is because they released stuff straight to Disney Plus. But those movies that were released to Disney Plus were also great. Turning Red and Soul are fantastic. I enjoy Luca. Disney's return to theaters was supposed to be Lightyear, and it stumbled a bit. And so for me, this it's just kind of another great movie from Pixar. If anything, the one thing I would be a little worried about is that if this movie does turn out to be a big theatrical hit for Disney, that they might take the wrong lessons and think that they really do need to lean back into like sequel territory just because it's Inside Out 2. When really, I think it's just Inside Out. The original movie was such a fantastic film that people immediately want to see what happens next. And it's such an easy, relatable hook of like, oh, of course there's new emotions, of course things are going to get crazy when Riley hits puberty. And I think that you can keep this franchise going for a long time. There's plenty of stories to tell with Riley in high school, because eventually you'd have to get around to the idea of Riley having some kind of romantic relationship, or her first boyfriend, or maybe her first girlfriend, her first date, anything like that. Even though they did do a thing where like it was Riley's quote unquote first date with an animated short, but it wasn't exactly the same as it would be, if it were someone who was like a teenager. And you could even do this like with Riley going to college and becoming an adult and getting a job and all these things. I would absolutely love to see, the franchise continue like that. So I hope that it just does well, because I want to see good movies continue to be made and be rewarded by people seeing them in theaters where they
Yeah.
should be seen.
Yeah, totally. I was looking ahead, and the next Pixar movie is Elio, which is coming out next year. And that's another original movie. I was not crazy about the trailer for that, but I'm really hoping that the director, Adrian Molina, who co directed Coco, will be able to surprise me with that one. So fingers crossed for the future of Pixar. And then I think there's Toy Story 5 in
Yeah.
2026 is the current schedule for upcoming Pixar stuff. So, all right. Any closing thoughts about Inside Out 2 that we didn't touch on? Any moments that you wanted to highlight, or anything at all, BJ?
The one other thing, well, one, Pouchy forever, Pouchy, our Lord and Savior. Um, I weirdly love the sort of companion crushes that the emotions have on what feels like their natural other in this, sadness and embarrassment, fear and anxiety. There's like a little bit of like cute bestie frenemy stuff going on with envy and disgust. Really loved that. I thought it was a very cute touch of showing how there are emotions that are similar but different, and they work well together. I thought that was very, very cute, and I like that a lot.
Shout out to Nostalgia popping up for
Jim Squibb, you
yeah,
icon.
a couple brief bits. It was nice that they had her pop up, and they're like, no, we're not, you're not ready for that yet. It's you got some time to wait before you come around.
Yeah. Yeah, I real quick, and I hate to end on a down note, but I was kind of bummed to watch this movie and not have the voices of Bill Hader and Mindy Kaling in my ears again. Like they were so good in that first movie, and like this time, like Disney, what are you doing? Just pay them to come back. What on earth would possess you to move forward without paying them whatever they were asking for? Considering how successful the first movie was and how how many people were like excited about this one. It's just kind of a baffling decision.
I will say that I do think Tony Hale was a great replacement for Bill Hader. As much as I would have
He
loved
was.
Bill Hader to like be paid what he deserves to be paid, Liza Lapira, on the other hand, I feel like that one felt like it was a little bit of a downgrade because there was something about her delivery that wasn't nearly as like pointed as Mindy
Mhm.
Kaling's voice was.
Yeah.
It just didn't feel like it like had the same punch that Mindy Kaling brought with her voice. She just has a very unique way of saying things and making them just hit that sharply.
Yeah. I also really love Io Adebri, but she plays Envy in this movie. And like, I didn't really think that was the appropriate emotion a lot of times. Like, she's good as the character, but it just kind of seemed like the moments where she takes over the console of Riley's mind, like, it's not really envious moments a lot of the time. So I don't know. I
Well,
felt like they
so
could have
there's
come
a
up with a
difference
different.
between envy and jealousy is the thing. And like this is very much envy. Like jealousy I think is that emotion but negative. Envy is that emotion but like kind of gushy, if that makes sense. So I think she nailed it in that regard because her form of envy is like, "Wow, you're so cool. Wow." And not like I wish I had that, which is
Yeah.
jealousy. Like
Yeah.
they're two different emotions.
And
Okay. All right.
initially, I thought the same thing that Ben did, but then like what I ended up liking about Envy was that Envy really fed into anxiety, and so like having her be
Yep.
like a secondhand man, like basically like the little guy that's always like, yeah, Muggsy, get him, yeah, yeah, like Envy was kind
Love
of
that
like,
guy.
yeah, Envy was like basically like the one like, oh my gosh, yeah, like we need to do this because yeah, I want to have that. And so I enjoyed that, and it's funny that you mentioned jealousy as well because there's an article that's I don't know if it's on Slash Film or it's going to be on Slash Film this weekend. But initially, jealousy was one of the other new emotions that was considered for the movie. There were actually 9 total new emotions that were going to come in because the whole concept was that they wanted to overwhelm Riley and headquarters with a bunch of new emotions that were hard to control, but it ended up just being a little too much and it was unwieldy. And they also felt like they had a really hard time creating a distinction between jealousy and envy because envy was also included in that lineup. And they
Mhm.
even had there's concept art that you can see in the article where they had gags where the other emotions kept confusing envy and jealousy as twins. So like
Oh, I love that.
that was a pretty funny bit.
Okay, excellent. All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for today's episode of the show. You can find much more about Inside Out 2 at slashfilm.com. Slash Film Daily is published every weekday, bringing you the most exciting news from the world of movies and TV, as well as deeper dives into the great features that you can find on the site. You can subscribe to the show on Apple, Overcast, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Send your feedback, questions, comments, concerns, and mailbag topics to us at bpearson@slashfilm.com. Make sure to leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention your email on the air. Don't forget to take a minute to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That really does help us out a lot. Tell your friends about the show any way you can. Thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you all.